am Anna Seawold, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about growing ourselves while raising our children. I'm a psychologist, educator, and parent coach, and on this podcast, I explore how you can connect to your authentic self, practice radical self-care, and raise emotionally healthy children. Let's break the generational cycle of trauma for a more peaceful, kind, and compassionate world. Today, emotional regulation for parents. I welcome back to the show a dear friend, colleague, and fellow podcaster, Hunter Clarke-Fields. She's the host of the Mindful Mama podcast. She's a mindfulness mentor and the author of Raising Good Humans book. This episode is a supportive, gentle, uplifting conversation, a reminder for all of us on the path of conscious parenting. Because as you know, it can get lonely, isolating, and difficult at times. As parents of teenagers, Hunter and I both share how parenting without punishments not only really works, but pays incredible dividends in the long run. And as Hunter indicates, parenting becomes easier with years. So if you find yourself challenged at times, know that it does get easier with time. Have faith. Keep your gaze at the bigger picture. Ditch the unrealistic expectations of perfect parenting. In this episode, we share practical advice on giving yourself credit, allowing goodness to come in, dealing with feelings of unworthiness, not believing in your thoughts, staying present, practicing non-reactivity, restraint, and emotion regulation, and so much more. I really enjoyed speaking with Hunter, and I am positive you're going to love it too. But before we get to today's episode, let me share an important note. Since 2015, I have poured my heart and soul into creating and producing this podcast. It holds a special place in my life as it allows me to deliver high-quality content that truly matters without relying on paid advertising. Just as I live my life guided by values such as generosity, contribution, community, service, integrity, this podcast embodies those principles as well. I am committed to maintaining the podcast's independence and ensuring that it remains a platform dedicated to your growth and well-being without paid advertising. That's why I am wholeheartedly seeking your support as a listener. I believe in the power of community, and I want this podcast to be fully listener-supported. There is a tremendous amount of work that goes into delivering high-quality content to you, from the initial planning to conducting interviews, editing, and promoting each episode. It's a labor of love that requires time, effort, and financial resources. Additionally, there are hosting fees to keep the podcast accessible to you. However, despite the challenges, I am deeply passionate about creating this podcast. It enriches my life beyond words, and with your kind support, I can continue bringing you empowering content on a weekly basis without interruption. By relying on generous donations from our listeners, we can uphold the integrity and authenticity of the show. It allows us to remain true to our mission, providing you with valuable insights and life-changing conversations without compromising on the quality and diluting the content with intrusive advertisements. If you have found value in our podcast and witnessed its positive impact, I kindly invite you to consider making a donation. Your donation, no matter the size, will make a significant difference. Together, let's ensure that this podcast continues to thrive and touch the lives of individuals and families around the globe. Thank you for considering supporting this meaningful endeavor that means so much to me. Your generosity reflects the spirit of our community and reinforces our commitment to authenticity and growth. To contribute and learn more about how you can help sustain the show, please visit authenticparenting.com/support. Once again, authenticparenting.com/support. Let's embrace the power of listener support and make this podcast a fully listener-supported show. Thank you for being a part of our Authentic Parenting community. Your support and presence are deeply appreciated. Together, we can create a more peaceful, kind, and compassionate world. Please enjoy. So Hunter, welcome to the podcast. You are one of my favorite podcast guests, and you've been on the podcast, I don't know, more than 3 times, I think. I have to count how many times you've been on.
We'll have to count it up.
I have another guest who has been 4 times. So let's see.
I'm honored. Your show is incredible, so I'm honored to be on that many times.
Oh, well, welcome. You've been my podcaster, friend, colleague, mom, friend for a long time. And I think the listeners, whoever is a new listener, they don't know that we know each other in real life too. We met, our children met several times. We've done things together and our friendship started online. So I'm really grateful over the years we have maintained this connection. So I'm really excited to have you here to talk about emotional regulation for parents.
So important. I feel like it all sort of like it's the foundation for all the things, for sure. And I think we're realizing that more and more. I mean, I don't know if you've noticed this shift, Anna, but like, I think we're realizing like there's so many people talking more now about the nervous system and emotional regulation and kids regulation and how we are interconnected. So anyway, that whole thing, it just makes me very hopeful that there's a lot more understanding now.
Yes, there is. I am happy about that. I think when we started our podcasts way back in the day, it wasn't as widespread. I think now with Instagram or maybe TikTok, all those other social media, the messages are spreading faster and people are more aware. Ordinary parents, use terms like nervous system regulation, dysregulation, co-regulation, which is great. It penetrated into the general conversation. I think, one of the biggest and most important skills that I have worked hard to cultivate has been self-regulation, emotional regulation. As a child who was an intense, impulsive, highly sensitive, empathic kid, I've come a long way, and I am very surprised at myself sometimes. I'm almost 50, but I can tell how much I have learned and changed in terms of emotion regulation and how not only it's affecting my parenting, how it's affecting all of my relationships. I don't get triggered as much by stimuli or people, how I approach conflict, how I disengage from, tense conversations or how I manage my emotions has been a tremendous journey. How has it been for you?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. It's interesting because my husband was saying, we had dinner with someone a few weeks ago and the person was like 35 and he's like, oh, she reminds me of you when you like really intense about things and now you're like chilled out more. And I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, well, is that bad that I'm not? But anyway, yeah, I think it's interesting that like my husband and other people have seen that. And sometimes I think it's so funny when I talk to people and they're like, oh, you're so like chill. And I'm like, wow, that's really interesting because it's not really my natural sort of MO to be like super chill, but I have all these practices that calm me down. And that's really what I need. I have a lot of energy. I have a lot of, I feel things intensely like you, that whole like sensitive child, highly sensitive person thing. I could really, relate to all of that. And yeah. And I think also I think that like it's a major priority in my life, right? Like to that I'm going to take care of that. I'm not going to let myself get super stressed, because I know how it affects everyone. It affects even my work, but it affects my family. It affects how I interact with everyone, how I experience everyday life. And so the practices, all the mindfulness practices and things that help me to calm my nervous system and to, be in a state of more equilibrium. I mean, it's amazing because, like I was telling you, my daughter is a 16-year-old now and has been having like health challenges and things like that. And it's like, there are big things that life will throw at every human being, right? And we need a little bit of space and capacity to be able to absorb all the challenges that life holds. And I know that everybody doesn't have that space and capacity, not through their own fault, because we live in a country that has like zero safety net for parents and zero support for parents. And that's not your fault if you're super stressed out because of all the circumstances around that. But there's also a place for really like understanding that our emotional regulation, our ability to be grounded is the foundation for us to be able to live a happy, healthy, fulfilled life, but also to be able to parent effectively, to be able to access our whole brain, to be able to respond in ways that like great parenting coaches may tell us, like, here's a better way to respond to your kid. And that's wonderful. But if you're, you can't do that if you're completely dysregulated and stressed and, can't use your whole brain. And there's a lot of pieces to that. But I feel like it's like the blessing of my life because I didn't push my children away, through my own reactivity, right? Like the way my father did and, the things that went down, in many families. And I could see the pattern starting in my own self. But I didn't do it. I was able to change that and I didn't do that. And we're close. And that is like the greatest blessing of my life.
I agree. It may be we started looking at our patterns and shortcomings because of parenting. But I think the greater gain is for our own well-being, for us to be happy, for us to have a great sense of well-being, because parenting is just a short period of time in our life. And we still have to be a person in this world. It's great that we started because of parenting to work on ourselves, but the gains are for us, for our own well-being, for our mental and physical health, and for us to show up greatly in all of our relationships. So that's wonderful. I will link in the show notes to our previous conversations so that the people can listen to those conversations. And I want us not to repeat, but of course, I forgot already what we talked about in those previous conversations. But what are you finding, since both of us have high schoolers, older children, teenagers, what are you finding easy in terms of emotional regulation, self-regulation? Since you've done a lot of work, and what are there areas still that are challenging for you, raising teenagers?
Yeah. With teenagers, you have the classic thing of like the teen attitude, right? Like that's kind of what is like the big challenge for parents. One of the things that is really helpful is that our teens aren't they're not like pushing away from us or resisting everything we say, because we never use like punishments or like timeouts or whatever. Like we didn't use those tools. We always, when we had a conflict, we tried to figure out how to like make sure everybody's needs got met. Like, what are your needs? What are my needs? Okay, what can we do about it? It's not to say we never used like, power.
Threats
we had some, of course we had some boundaries and, we have boundaries and all of that stuff, but we never had to like pull out the big guns, so to speak, to do that because they're ineffective. And now, so we don't have that resistance, right? So we don't have that resistance with our kids now. But I think like for me, as far as so in a way, I just want to like let the people know, because when you have a young kid, like if you're listening right now and you have a young kid, you hear Anna telling you hear these experts telling you like, that, you can be firm and you can be kind, and that, maybe that timeouts are actually something that actually dysregulate your kid and they need to actually help regulation and in regulation in their tough moments. And they're not maybe disrespecting you, but they're maybe having a hard time, right? Like you hear these things that kind of go against the traditional cultural messages. And I just want to say that I remember when my daughter was my second daughter was born, I remember going on a walk and meeting a family. It was like our first walk after the baby was born in the neighborhood. And I got to talking to them about parenting, and they said they didn't use timeouts. And I was like, oh my God, I'm never going to let my child run ramshot over me like that. And I remember having this mindset, and then ultimately ended up learning and not using these destructive techniques. And I have to say, parenting has gotten easier and easier and easier as time goes by because of that. The things that are the challenges, right? Like that you picture from this day and this age bracket, right? Teens, is like sort of the teen attitude, and they're doing, they're separating and things like that. I'm able to like kind of take that less personally. And so when my daughter, it's really my 13-year-old that's having all this, like these moments now, I'm able to say, if she has an attitude with me or whatever, I'm able to say, hey, when you talk to me like that, I feel hurt, and it makes it hard for me to talk to you. Right. And it's very easy and very genuine for me to say that. Whereas with my first daughter, I had to be like, oh, what am I feeling under the iceberg of my frustration and anger? I had to like go back and figure it all out. Right. I had to like dissect the moment and figure out what my I message was about that moment. And now I practiced it and I'm comfortable with it. I know exactly what I'm feeling underneath the frustration. And actually, I feel less of the frustration because I can experience like, oh, that's kind of hurts, right? When you do that. And so when I'm able to open myself up vulnerably a little bit more, but it's interesting because I say that. And one of the things I've noticed in myself as far as like challenges I'm working on is that I'm noticing an old habit of defensiveness coming up, which is something that I learned in spades as a child, right? Because, I was like attacked verbally and physically, really. And so I learned a lot of defensiveness. And now sometimes I'm noticing the defensiveness in me, like the bristling and the defensiveness in me, when maybe it's definitely, that's my learning edge. Anyway, that's kind of like where I am, like as far as like my learning edge. So there's like some good news, and then there's always growth. I think that's for sure.
It's so reassuring to hear that with your second daughter, you're noticing the payoffs of your practice. And you're so right. When we are first learning the skills, it takes a bit of like mental gymnastics and work to do in the moment. You feel that it's laborious, so to speak, emotionally, to dissect, to analyze, to figure out the need. And it could be exhausting at times. And I can see why many of us would say, oh my gosh, no, let's revert to the old traditional ways of parenting. But I'm also glad that you highlighted that parenting has gotten easier with years because of you, and I can concur of the fact that we haven't used punishment, fear-based parenting approach. And I see the result of it now in teenage years, the quality of connection that we have. Yes, we do get the teenage attitude and teenage moodiness and all of this, but because the connection is so strong and the trust, repairs are a lot easier. And, children don't resist. There is maybe pushback a little bit. Of course, they have to grow up and become their own person, but it's a lot easier. I find that too. It's a lot easier. It's a wonderful time, like having a teenager for me. And I have only one, so I have practiced the skills on this one experience. I am enjoying this stage so much with all its complexities. But my learning edge, if you want me to tell what my learning edge is, I could have this at times guilt producing type of approach, guilt inducing in my kids, sort of when I'm becoming less capable, I'm losing all my faculties. When I'm feeling hurt, quote unquote, in the dynamic, I could say a guilt-inducing statement. And my daughter points out immediately, she says, stop, mom. That's like, you're trying to induce guilt in me. And it snaps me out of the moment immediately, because it's not easy to stay conscious the whole time on the whole path, right? The old patterns are so strong, even with us. Like I have 15 years of parenting practice. Yes, those pools are not frequent. The traditional parenting patterns are not so frequent. I am able to stay, on this path of parenting steadily for a long period of time. But when I'm stressed out, when I'm going through something, life is full of challenges. I can resort to those moments, the old ways of thinking or behaving, but they are short-lived because I recognize them in myself very quickly and my daughter points them out. So it's a really good process.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah. I mean, everybody, I could see that in my family too. Everybody in the family is a little more aware because we've been practicing some of those things. So we're all like, hey, what you doing with that? Why are you guilting your sister or whatever, right? Or why are you guilting my sister or whatever it is, right? I could see moments like that happening. That really goes back to that whole foundation of the emotional regulation. So you can, and like Anna said, it's you're not going to do it 100% of the time. You're not going to do it 90% of the time, I think actually when they were doing the research on good enough parenting, right? Wasn't it the most attuned parents were 30% of the time, was maximum of attunement and attention. So I think that's so hopeful to help us to remember that, this was definitely done very imperfectly, and our kids can be, that drive for connection and attunement, and to have someone on your team, I think that can lead to, a real strong connection in your teens, regardless of what, how long you've been practicing some more skillful means.
Recently, I was walking with my daughter and I asked her, I said, is there anything that I am doing with you that I'm not aware of? Am I making some kind of mistakes, or have I said anything to you that I haven't repaired or I need to work on? Do we have something that we haven't looked at? She looked at me. She said, Mom, are you crazy? She said, no, of course not. You would know. I would really talk to you about it. And I'm like, wow, it took a lot out of me to be very humble and vulnerable to come and ask, because, it's scary to ask this question. What if she really has some kind of grievance? What if there is something that we need to work on? My vulnerable side doesn't want to know that part. I want to be oblivious and just move forward. But it felt great. It felt great that, yeah, of course she would talk to me about this. Why am I holding on to this kind of feeling inside of me? So that was a really good moment.
That's so cool.
I have to say, it felt really reassuring, because we always think that we're doing a bad job, that, we're always focusing on the shortcomings, on the negative. We did this imperfectly. Even looking back now, I have regrets. Oh, I should have done this way. Oh, wow. Maybe I should have done this. Now I have regrets retrospectively in terms of parenting. And when I catch myself, I'm like, wait, Anna, no. The past is gone. Let's focus in the present moment, Whatever you have done or haven't done, it's done. You can't just ruminate and criticize yourself for something that was not even relevant back then. You did your best back then, 10 years ago. I think we need to focus on that frequently. I think parents need to cultivate some kind of practice to recognize what a great parent, what a great mom I am. What have I done recently or in the past year or in the past week or today that indicates that I'm a great parent? I think we always focus on the minutiae of things, on the tiny little details, and we forget the big picture, that it's all about the quality of the relationship that we have with our children. Can we focus on that in those moments and not hyper-focus on small little detail or conflict or argument and make a conclusion about the quality of our parenting? I think this is a very tricky area. A lot of parents, find themselves doubting themselves. What can you say about what practices can you cultivate, or what have you found helpful?
Well, you were making me think of, in the new book, I have a chapter, I think that's called, I don't remember every chapter title because there's 50 of them, but it's not enjoying parenting or something like that. And I talk about the negativity bias, right? And it's so natural for human beings. Like it's so normal and natural for us to, to like focus in on, oh, I did this one thing. And, there are neuroscientists who say, that our brain is like Velcro for negative things and like Teflon for the positive things. And that's just what we inherited from our ancestors who had to survive. So they had to be aware of where the dangers were. And, it wasn't as important to be focused in on the joys. And so we inherit that. And I think it's just so helpful to understand that this negativity bias is one of our default settings, just as our default settings are, we have a default setting to not be in the present moment. We have a default setting to kind of always be sort of thinking towards the future and planning and things like that. And then a little less being retrospective. But understanding that these are the human default settings that without any kind of effort or practice, that we're pretty much all guaranteed to be sort of anxious and distracted, right? Not in the present moment and a little focused on the negative. That's how the human brain works. And that's all to keep us alive and keep our survival. And that's okay. Like that's fine. But we just understanding that we have to realize like, oh, we need to take some active steps to counteract these natural human defaults so that we can be grounded, so that we can have that well-being, that equilibrium and things like that. Without some kind of active practice to kind of counteract that, we're going to be anxious. We're going to be focused on the negative. The good news is that the human brain is very plastic. It's very open to change. They used to think that the brain only has a certain number of neurons or whatever, but now we know that it's changing and growing all the time, and what we practice grows stronger. So even though we have this default setting, like to be looking at the negative and to be worrying, as you described, like what a mindfulness practice can help us do is to start to interrupt that cycle. And then we can also practice to, like you said, like you were saying, like, let's get into the big picture and notice the good things we've done as parents and things like that. And actually doing things like that and leaning into that and leaning into the sensation of that and sort of staying with the sensations of that for 18 plus seconds, they say in the research, can actually really shift and change our brain so that we are less prone to seeing the negative. And that's very, very helpful in parenting because, when I have a 13-year-old, as you said, and a 16-year-old, and we can, 13-year-olds are like a little chaotic sometimes and just like not paying attention to stuff she's doing. I could really see how I could like get very critical, and we're like, you're this age now, you should be able to do blah, 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 blah. Right. And we can focus on the negative in our kids not because we want to pull them down or something, but just because we love them and want them to do well in the world. It all comes from love. But having a mindful awareness of like, oh, I'm focused on this criticalness. Oh, how can I focus on, there's space there for like where these things that ostensibly maybe make you happy or generally improve your own well-being have a real concrete direct impact on your kids. And so that I think that can be such a great motivator to practice and to start to get some space from those thoughts. So say, for instance, you were having those thoughts of like, have I messed up my child? Have I done something wrong that she's holding this grudge for me? There's a practice of distancing ourselves from those thoughts where we can put in front of, when we notice that thought, we can put the phrase in front of it, I'm having the thought that. And so if then we say, oh, I'm having the thought that I may be messing up my child. I'm having the thought that I have done something wrong. And then we start to look at it as a thought rather than something we believe and is true and things like that. And then when we look at it as a thought, we can think, oh, is this actually very helpful? Or can I just let it go and refocus on the present moment, right? So there's a lot of concrete little practices like that that can shift that default setting. And it's incredibly helpful.
I want to add something to what you're saying, actually, too. For people who have, early childhood trauma, because their nervous system hasn't sort of internalized a sense of safety, on top of having this negativity bias that we all have evolutionarily, people who have early childhood trauma, the stress system is a little off, right? The alarm has been rang many times and your perception for safety and threat is skewed and your orientation is towards threat and danger. So I want people to know that if you know that you had a lot of trauma, abuse, neglect early in your life, before your 18th birthday, let's say, know that on top of this negativity bias, you may also have an orientation towards negativity and danger and threat. So even if things are great in your life, you know that it's because of those factors that you are focusing on the negative and you're not seeing the large picture or unable to grasp the large picture. And so that has to be a really mindful, cultivated practice over and over and over again to cultivate optimism, to practice gratitude and appreciation on a daily basis so that you can change that wiring. Because it's a lot harder for people who have a lot of trauma, right? Because your orientation is towards threat automatically. You don't see the positive in anything. And recognizing that it's not because you're a bad parent today, it's because of this wiring, and know that you can change that with mindful practices. That's number one. Number two, what you said, some people, when you said bask into the sensation or the feeling, let that sink in, Rick Hanson's work, right? Like for 30 or 20 seconds or 18 seconds. If you're experiencing something good or positive, let that sink in. A lot of people, again, who have this trauma orientation and the, traumatic history, they also have a lot of shame and unworthiness tied to that. So they cannot allow goodness to come into their life. They cannot accept compliments. They feel undeserving of good stuff. I have a client recently who after, it's a hard divorce and she had a very difficult life and a lot of trauma. She's in a good relationship and she says, I can't believe someone loves me and I want to be happy, but I can't. So people like that, they have a hard time accepting the feeling that, I deserve happiness. Let me experience this fully, this joyous moment. And so what they end up doing at times is they sabotage their own well-being and their own happiness because of this underlying belief that I'm not deserving anything good because I'm a piece of crap, because I'm unworthy of love and receiving of goodness. I think it's important to know our history, our background, and what has happened to us and attribute the feelings of unworthiness and shame and all of those things to that. And what can we do today to change that? Instead of being a victim of what has happened to us, a lot of things happen to all of us, right? But we can do things today. That's the beauty of it. We can cultivate intentional practices being the key word here. We have to practice them as frequently as we can because, as we stated, both of us, we see results in ourselves. And there are tremendous payoffs in how we are in the world and how we parent our children.
I think that worthiness thing is a big piece. I see that all the time in mindful parenting members and things like that, is that we don't feel like, we don't feel like we're worth it. So sometimes that's one of the things that I encourage people to do, is to do it for the other people in your life. Do it for your kids. Do it for that person you love, to develop your own worthiness, right? To develop your own practices of stability and healing and all of those things. Like, if that's your avenue in, just take that avenue in. Take what's ever easy. I mean, but it is heartbreaking to think about, like, the trauma that's in so many backgrounds of so many people. Like, the humans are suffering in incredible ways. It makes me think of like the Gabor Mate's recent book, like The Myth of Normal. And it's like, there's this myth that there's like someone who's perfectly, that there's this like normal sort of baseline, and there's so much suffering in everybody. I see. But go back to I want to hear what number 3 is. You got me intrigued.
I was commenting on the points that you made, how you said that we notice the negative in our children. And to that, I would say, yes, again, that's also an intentional practice. Even when our children make mistakes or not do the right thing, so to speak, or, whatever the case might be, can we see the goodness in them? Can we focus on some positive aspect, even in the negative that they are doing? When your child is, speaking back, for example, right? People always say, don't talk to me like that, or see that as, my child is talking back. But can you see that my child is very assertive? My child knows what their needs are. They're standing up for their own integrity. They know what they want, and they're very assertive. And not only noticing that in yourself, but verbalizing it, because you don't want to just highlight the negative in your children. It's such a terrible place to be when you're constantly focusing on the negative, commenting on what your child is not doing, the lack mentality. And it can create a really negative atmosphere for your child to live in. So I think intentionally practicing seeing the goodness in our children and commenting on a daily basis on the positives, even when there is minimal effort in something, just saying, I see that you're working very hard and you're trying, just trying. Don't focus on, oh, you're not doing it. Don't focus on the outcome. Can you comment on the process? Can you encourage your child? Can you make them believe that you believe in them, that you are their support system? Because in doing so, in focusing on the positive, and I'm not saying close your eyes on the negative, but don't be hypercritical. Can you bring out more positive in your children and comment and appreciate and show it verbally? It makes a big difference for children, because where else do they hear those positive messages about themselves in the world? Nowhere. No teacher compliments them, no coach. The world is a competitive place. Our children are playing sports. They are in arts, in school. It is at home that we need to ensure that we convey those messages that you're important, that you're special, that you're valuable, that there's nothing wrong with you. Basically, the child will internalize the way we speak to them. But if we're constantly focusing on the expectations, on the outcome, on the grades, on the things that they haven't accomplished yet, the lack, the mistakes, the mess, it's not encouraging. It's not supportive, And so I think switching that is also really, really, it yields such big results. My daughter verbally acknowledges that. She's like, Mom, thank you for saying that. Thank you for noticing that. Because I can see like she's working hard on something or she's struggling. Can I comment on the effort and on the struggle and not say, well, you didn't do this? Yes, sure, she didn't do the thing, but can I acknowledge that she has the good attitude about it? Is there something good about the thing that she is not doing? I am sure there is. And in doing so, yes, we are undoing the unworthiness pattern. We're not perpetuating the same shame cycle. We need to break that because we don't want to induce shame in our children.
Absolutely. It takes a lot of restraint, I think. I mean, for me, that's what I notice is that it takes a lot of restraint. Like this morning, my daughter ate all the special peanut butter that we got my husband for Father's Day. And I was like, I need to let her know. But it wasn't the right time. Like, I actually thought about I hadn't been able to kind of put those, I love the analogy of the relationship bank account, right? You have to put a bunch of deposits in before you withdraw. And I think that there's a lot of restraint that happens in parenting in some ways, in parenting skillfully, in that there's a restraint from freaking out. There's a practice at some point of just restraining yourself from freaking out, losing it at your kids, right? Like that's a restraint practice. Like we're looking at like, oh, I'm noticing all these messes around the house. They drive me bananas. And it's a restraint practice sometimes to not pull out each one and discuss it all the time, that kind of thing. Like that's a restraint practice. And these are these practices where our brain has this thought and, we feel like we have to say everything that comes to our minds. And that practice of holding ourselves back and being more thoughtful ultimately. But it's actually almost like sometimes like not saying some of these thoughts that are in our head and choosing a better time can be as hard as like stopping your pee midstream. I mean, honestly, it's like feels very uncomfortable and strange, but you can say, okay, I'm going to do this at a better time, right? And I love that of like then acknowledging positive because that's what we want to water the good seeds, right? And so we've got to do it in ourselves too, and I think that going back to that worthiness and those things, like we want to water those good things in ourselves. So how can we practice that in ourselves? And then how can we acknowledge that in our kids? And I love the idea of just like, what can we appreciate and sort of shifting our attention to that is very, very valuable.
I agree. I think one key question in what you're saying would be that in terms of restraint practices, does this matter? Oftentimes we're so automatic on autopilot. You haven't cleaned your room. Why haven't you? Everything is so automatic. Demands, commands, threats, expectations, blah, blah, blah. We blurt it out on our kids, but can you pause? Does this really matter? Like, no, it doesn't. It doesn't matter. In the long run, it doesn't matter. Like I have a teenager. What my focus is all the time is how finite my time is with my daughter. I have literally a couple of years left, and then she's going to be off to college and building her own life. If I am focusing on what she's not doing, she's not cleaning her room, she's not tidying up this, she's not doing this, she didn't pick up this. It's like, is this really worth it? Does this really matter in the long run? Does this matter for me now? Why? What's the why for me for saying that now? I think some of us are so, are living our lives on autopilot that pause practice, the restraint practice is so key, even in our relationships, in general, in life. Just stopping for a moment before saying something, before responding, before engaging, I think is the biggest thing we can all learn and practice. And especially it's so crucial in parenting when our young children's minds are developing, when they are receiving the messages from us, when we are pouring our love.
I want to amend it a little bit here because we're talking about restraint. And sometimes people hear me talk about like calming our stress response, getting ourselves to a calm place. And they misunderstand this to say that I should always be calm. I should always be regulated. And yeah, like this is great. Like that would be wonderful. That's what we're going for. Sure. That would be nice. But you're a human being and you have all the full range of emotions and you are allowed to have the full range of emotions and we can accept that. And in some ways, I think of like a practice. It is a restraint practice to do a practice that of something like name it to tame it, right? So what I'm saying is that what sometimes people misunderstand me and then they get in a moment that's frustrating. Kids are so frustrating. They're messy. They're disorganized. They don't listen. They make mistakes all the time. It's very frustrating and challenging. And you get into a moment, you're frustrated and you're challenged and you think, oh, Hunter says I should practice restraint. I should be calm. So I'm going to be calm. I'm calm. I'm calm. Calm. And then it's like, kaboom, you're just like exploding because you've been holding in. And your calm was actually really inauthentic. When you talk about authentic parenting, we have to also be real, right? Like restraint is a practice that is balanced with a practice of being real and being authentic. And so if you're getting to a place where you're getting dysregulated, you're getting frustrated, you're feeling irritated, all of those things, one of the things we can do is acknowledge that I'm starting to feel, say it out loud, right? I'm starting to feel so frustrated right now, and I feel like I need a break, right? That's actually a practice of restraint. It's a practice of like titrating the pressure, right? Of the pressure valve of your stress. Because we can't just like clamp a lid on it or like push that beach ball down under the water. It just like pops up even bigger somewhere later. So we need to recognize that we have to work with what's there. That is a very skillful and positive practice to name even your difficult feelings, right? Like when you name, I'm feeling frustrated, I need a break right now, something like that. Like it's so great because your kids are, they have incredible BS meters. So they know anyway that even if you're pretending to be calm, they know that you're not. So you might as well be real anyway. And then B, you're teaching them healthy emotional regulation because you're teaching them this is a way to like, and the research shows that really, really does help us regulate our feelings to just name them and to acknowledge them. And like you may be in a place like, and then as you get into that practice of naming them, that becomes a skillful practice. So that I got to a point where at one point, a number of years ago, my daughter was younger and she like laughed at me. It was bedtime. We had movie night. I was exhausted. And it was time to go to bed. And I was like, oh, maybe I can just ignore her and read my book. And she will just go upstairs and go to bed. And she didn't. And then she was like poking at me. And then she laughed at me. And I was like it was just like a raging volcano started erupting. But because I had been practicing more skillful means for a little while, it's not like my anger went away. I was angry, but what I did is I was in the practice of communicating that skillfully. So I yelled, I'm feeling really angry right now and I need a break. I just walked outside and I closed the door and I walked up and down the street for 15 minutes to cool down. But I was so proud of myself because I didn't say, you blah, 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 blah. I acknowledged my own feelings. And so this, in a way, like we have to work with the energy that's present. We can't just will ourselves to be calm, right? We have to kind of like do our emotional regulation jujitsu to help ourselves to get back to those places of equilibrium. And I think that is actually can be a practice of restraint, is to just channel that. When we do have a difficult feeling, channel it into something like name it to tame it.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And for me, when you first spoke about restraint, I didn't even thought about restraint equals calm. Restraint for me is I'm feeling really angry right now. I'm feeling that I want to strangle you right now. I'm feeling I want to bite your head off, or I'm feeling so frustrated. I want to just throw this thing. Like I'm feeling all those urges. And however, I am taking radical responsibility in noticing what I'm feeling, naming, if possible, what I'm feeling, or at least acknowledge and be with what I'm feeling, but never point out that you caused how I'm feeling. And with that responsibility piece for me is, what can you do to tame your arousal right now? What could you do? And that's the restraint practice for me. The restraint is not, can I be calm and zen? No, like stuff is bubbling up. I'm normal human. I can show anger. But what's crucial for my kid, for, parenting purposes, I want my child to see how I manage my anger without spilling it over onto other people, or without pointing fingers or hurting other people. For me, it's crucial for her to see that I do get angry, but I have the responsibility. I take the responsibility for my anger, and I do X, Y, and Z, and I don't blame her for my anger. I think that's crucial. Well, of course, my child has seen me in all of the emotions possible. I never suppressed an emotion to show that I am fake calm. And you're right. They recognize that. I've experienced that before when my daughter goes, don't speak with me with that fake calm voice, like when she was like 9 or something. Oh, yeah. They recognize that you're trying very hard, like in certain times when you're trying very hard to be calm and not lose your cool. No, it's okay to be angry, but in a constructive, healthy way. You don't want to scare your child with your anger or make them the target of your anger, hit them, beat them, throw them, I don't know. But can you do something about it? Can you even verbally acknowledge that I'm really feeling frustrated right now and I need a break? That's really powerful. Whoa, your child just saw that. An adult who I look out to, this is how adults handle frustration. And it's crucial to demonstrate how we handle those feelings. But that's a practice in and of itself, right? That the restraint, the taking the responsibility to do something about our own emotions instead of like using I messages instead of, you messages. And for each person, and you can't practice all at the same time. Maybe for someone who is new to this, can you practice just witnessing what you're feeling in that moment? That in and of itself is a really good practice to cultivate and practice that for a long time, for months, maybe practice when your child does something or says something to you and you feel a certain way. Can you just notice how you're feeling and restrain from doing or saying something? That's one practice. When you master that, can you do something else? Like, can you say, I'm feeling frustrated, I need a break? Like, that would be another practice to practice, and so on and so forth. I think breaking it down, for me, for example, now I can say with a lot of confidence that there aren't that many days that I lose my cool completely and I'm so disheveled that I don't know what to do in a moment. Those moments are very rare. The restraint I can practice pretty well. I can maybe not recognize what I'm feeling fully, but I can be responsible for removing myself and not saying hurtful things in the moment. At least that part I have some mastery over 15 years. And let's open this up a little bit, that sort of like for someone who is beginning, what would you recommend for them to work on and focus on in terms of like this restraint practice?
That's a good question. And it depends on the individual, I think, on themselves. But I mean, for me, one of the reasons that I promote and talk about mindfulness is because it's such a baseline practice for developing our awareness, developing our ability to developing that restraint, right? Developing that non-reactivity muscle. And so that's something I think that is incredibly helpful for everybody, especially when you're, maybe, you have a baby, you haven't even gotten to the point where you're like so super frustrated yet, right? Or maybe you have. But I think that developing practices, a practice that gives you time each day to stop going and doing, stop the forward motion, practice just being, practice feeling whatever sensations are arising in your body, practice not reacting to them by moving and itching and whatever all those things are that we do, right? And just take 3 minutes, take 5 minutes a day and invite your brain to come back to the present moment with kindness and curiosity. And that tiny little thing, this like maybe 5 minutes of your social media time, it really can be this sort of like superpower in this brain hack. And they've done studies, granted with a little bit more meditation time, kind of working up to some like 15 or 20 minutes, but that show that, Johns Hopkins had a meta study of 47 different studies that shows that 8 weeks of meditation does lower depression, does lower anxiety, as much as medication does. And, that it increases sense of well-being and it increases that impulse control. And that's really what we're talking about, right? Like we tend to be on autopilot. We tend to be reactive. So let's take a little bit of time every day to practice pausing, to practice not reacting, to practice stopping that forward motion, to practice just being. And the benefit of it is not only that you will be less reactive with your kids, which you probably will be, but a big benefit is just being able to be present with your kids and be present with everyone in your life. Because so many of us, like we get we're going and going and doing the next thing and doing the next thing. And then we're like, okay, I'll get to this Mexican vacation and then I'll be able to relax and I'll enjoy myself. But then you get to this Mexican vacation and your brain is still going and going and going because that's what you practice all the time. You can never stop and be present. There's a quote from my teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, that really, really inspires me and drives me. And I think this really sums it up in a really beautiful way, which is, when you love someone, the best thing you can offer is your presence. How can you love if you are not there? And I think that's like that. Oh, I mean, like, it gives me goosebumps. Like, I've said that quote a billion times, and it gives me goosebumps because that's really like the greatest sense of well-being and happiness is when, we are there, when we are really there. That's when we can love our kids. So I do think it's possible for parents. It's not, people think I'm crazy sometimes, but like, surgeons, active duty military and prisoners are all practicing some forms of mindfulness to help them be more present and less reactive. We can do it too. We can do it, parents. We got this.
Listen, well said. I'm not even going to comment on anything because that was just a perfect bow on this episode. The cherry on top of this beautiful cake or cupcake. It was wonderful speaking with you, and I hope the listener, took some notes and they will start seeing things differently. I hope we gave them hope and a sense of possibility to the younger parents that keep on track, stay on this path of conscious parenting. It's going to yield results. You're investing in this parenting. You may not see results now, but I don't know what results you're expecting, but you're going to have a better connected, loving relationship and less challenges. As Hunter said, parenting has gotten easier with years. And I want that sense of ease for a lot of parents. That's a possibility. As seasoned parents as we are compared to new moms. That's one message I want people to take away from this. And I want them to see the big picture and give themselves credit, not believe in their thoughts for sure, challenge their thoughts and know that, yes, you may have a negativity bias because you're human or an orientation towards threat because of your upbringing, but you can certainly, through mindfulness and other practices that we mentioned, rewire your brain for increased well-being and happiness. And with that, we can change the generational patterns of toxic shame and trauma in the next generation. Anything you want to add? I feel like that's how I summed up all the things that we said.
Yes. I guess I would just add, this is the big picture. I love that and all that. And Anna and I didn't do it perfectly. You may think we did because we're like writing books about it and podcasting about it, but we didn't do it perfectly. You don't have to do it perfectly either. You have permission to be human.
I agree with that. We never said we did it perfectly. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate your presence and your sharing and your calm wisdom.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna. Can I share about the new book? I'm so excited about it.
Yes, you can.
Okay. So yeah, just to let you know, dear listener, I have a new book, has all these ideas in it. It's called Raising Good Humans Every Day, 50 Simple Ways to Press Pause, Stay Present, and Connect with Your Kids. I'm so excited about this book. I feel super proud of it because, I know parents aren't getting through a 300-page volume of books. And it's like, you can finish a chapter in 3 to 4 pages. And it's super chock full of all this really, really practical pieces in a very warm way. And it goes into all these different areas of your life. So I highly recommend it. Raising Good Humans Every Day.
Me too. I highly recommend it. And we'll have links for people to pre-order if they're listening. Well, thank you so much. This was fun.
Thank you, Anna. I really appreciate it. It was really fun to talk to you again and connect. I love talking to you.